Great, thanks. Good morning, everybody. Let's slowly get started with today's session. In the chat, I have shared the link to the collaborative notes. Please add your name and affiliation to the participant list so we know who is here. Also, for the previous sessions, if you attended the sessions but did not add your name to the participant list there, please still do so. Sarah sent all the links to the collaborative notes from those sessions yesterday. So please make sure that you are on all the lists so we can keep track of who attended what session, which is nice for us to know and for you to be acknowledged in your contributions as well. So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this concluding session of the Fair Impact Synchronization Force Workshop Series 2024. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mariette Everhard. I work at DANS in the Netherlands, and I will be chairing today's session. In the background, we have Julie and Sarah from Trust IT with technical support and also with note keeping. But please feel free to add your own notes to the collaborative notes today as well, so we can, if we can all contribute, that would make the effort a little bit easier for everyone. So today, why are we here? We are talking about the Synchrinisation Force workshop series, as you all know, because you have probably attended the kickoff session, the topical sessions, maybe even previous sessions. So we are talking about this year's edition, the 2024 edition, which is the third in the series. No need to save the date because you have attended sessions and are here today. So let's skip that for now. So what is the plan for today? It is twofold. I will give a very brief recap of the goal of the Synchrinisation Force workshop series. So why did we create this series? Why did we give you all the input and ask for your input from your perspective, your projects and initiatives? And then I will hand over to different presenters to give some key findings, highlights, and recommendations from the topical sessions. So that is for today. And we would like to discuss the recommendations that came out of those sessions. So we would like to have this interactive and would like your input there as well. So a brief recap of the SyncForce series. So what is the aim? The aim is to discuss common challenges and priorities related to turning FAIR principles into practice. As you probably know, this has been mentioned quite often, but it's just good to briefly recap. So we are not doing this as a standalone project. This is all based on previous projects, previous initiatives, ambitions, such as the SHRIA, the multi-annual roadmap. So we're taking all of that into account into our discussion in this series. And for today, like I said, we will present a summary of the findings from the 6 topical sessions and the recommendations that came out of it. And we would like to have your input on that as well. Let me just briefly share the notes, link to the notes again in the chat for the people that have entered later on. So the goal of the Synchrinisation Force workshop series, as I said, this is a three-part series. We held one every year. This is the third and final one. The goal is to chart the developments in 6 different areas this time from representative projects and initiatives. So that is from our perspective, from Fair Impact, but also from your perspective, from your projects and your initiatives. We have several outputs. So on the one hand, we have the spreadsheet. So that is the survey that we sent out before each of the topical sessions, and you provided your input. It is still possible to add some of your input there. Please do so today if you still want to add something. And I want to thank everyone that already did. And then the other output that we are currently working on and that we will be sharing with you is the workshop report. This will be finalized in December, so next month. And today will kind of be a presentation of the content of that report for which we would like to ask you for your input. And we will be sharing the link to that draft version today as well. So you can also add your comments directly to the draft, because there is limited time today in this session to go into detail into the discussion. So please, if you have anything more to say or want to add anything, please do so in the draft and we will be sharing the link to that. Then finally, because this is the third and final workshop series, we will be taking the content and the recommendations from all 3 workshop series that we held over the past 3 years. We will combine this into a white paper, and this will be finalized in March 2025. So please keep an eye out for that one as well. Now, the landscape that we are talking about, you probably have seen this picture multiple times, but just to briefly show you again, you are probably representatives from one or multiple of these initiatives or projects. And it is nice that we had more than 90 registered participants for this year's workshop series. So that is great. Now, the topics that we talked about this year, we had 6 topical sessions. We had one on metrics and assessing fairness, one on sustainability of project outputs, one on persistent identifiers, one on legal and organizational interoperability, trustworthy and fair enabling repositories, and then finally we had one on metadata, semantics, and interoperability. And then today, the 7th of November, is our plenary discussion, our concluding session. So what will we be doing today? We will go through each of these topical sessions. So for each session, we will have a presenter that will give you the highlights and the recommendations. They will give a short 5-minute presentation, after which we have 5 minutes for a little bit of a discussion on those recommendations or those highlights. That is tight because we have a tight schedule. We have a lot to go through, but like I said, please keep in mind that you can always add your comments to the draft, to the workshop reports that we have written. But also we have a little bit of extra time at the end. So we have approximately 20 minutes for a more general discussion. So if there's anything you still want to go back to for one of the topical sessions, or you might have comments that apply to multiple or all of the sessions, we have some time at the end to do that. But for now, let's keep it to the 5-minute presentation, 5-minute discussion, just to make sure that everybody can provide their input and we can go through all of the sessions. So having said that, I have kept to my time. I'm 1 minute early, so that's good. We've won 1 minute already. I would like to give the floor to our first presenter. So Mike, he will be talking about the metrics and assessing fairness. Mike, take it away.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. Hopefully I don't overrun the actual 10 minutes, so we keep 1 minute ahead. With the metrics and assessing fairness session, we started with 4 basic questions on supporting researchers in metrics and fairness verification, and on discipline-specific metrics and tests, on fair implementation profiles, and on a catalogue of methods and tests for assessing fairness. Next slide, please. Which were very much based upon a set of recommendations from the previous workshop in 2023. So I think I'll skip that slide because that is just pretty much the same again. Next slide, please. So our highlights. The session was very lively discussion and a lot going on in the chat windows as well, which sort of highlights the importance of fair metrics and assessment, because there's a lot of interest in it, which has made it very difficult to select any highlights from this session. But it's also made it very difficult for Micah. Her keyboard was glowing hot by the end of the session with all the typing she had to do. There was a lot going on, so it's quite a difficult thing to pick any highlights from it. So if we take a look at, I've picked sort of 4 bits and pieces. The first one really is looking at that maybe researchers are best placed for responsibility of their documentation of their resources, but it needs to be with close support from for the researchers as close as possible from repositories and other sources, and with the possibility of integrating automated fair assessments in repositories and such areas. It leaves the question whether repositories should take on more responsibility, taking that away from researchers. But however, I think it's probably going to be more like a co-responsibility between both of these stakeholders. However, realistically, many repositories just are too busy and do not have the resources to take on such responsibilities at the moment. Fairness and assessment should really be seen as a journey, not all or nothing principle at the end, just part of the whole research cycle, from grant application through the data management plans through to deposit and reuse. Discipline-specific assessment tools may be more accurate, but often lead to lower scores, which is often due to their strictness. This can cause frustration and possible preferences for more generic tools, which has become problematic. So even though creating metrics in itself is easy, endorsement, uptake, and convergence are incredibly hard. And even with the creation of metrics, it's important to be aware that there are biases and that these are always present. Presenting such biases clearly and transparency may prevent overconfidence in the metrics and can help shift focus to the assessment tool as an assistance tool rather than a be-all and end-all. The thing about quality of FIPS, fair implementation profiles, depends greatly on the knowledge of the person creating it. And another important aspect of that is that they may also be leave the organization. So the expertise can leave. And this is an important thing to keep aware of when creating something which seems to be a once-only development. And lastly, one of the key things we need to consider is fairness of fair metrics in themselves and how metrics and tests could be catalogued with the help will lead to help harmonization. Having information about the metrics and tests can showcase the biases, as I've already mentioned, and that part of them allows communication and communities to make their own informed decision about trusting metrics and the tools. Next slide, please. So a platform for publicly available success stories we felt was very important from this to improve the awareness and uptake of FAIR in various research communities, to understand perhaps what other communities are doing and what may be different to what your community is doing is also important. Researchers should be supported throughout the whole research life cycle by a cohesive network of supporters, although using increasingly automated systems, capturing both the metadata and documentation, but it is still important that we can bring this all together to make sure that the assessments are well done across the range. Community specificity is an essential part of FAIR, but it also brings along perhaps fragmentation with different metrics and tools, and that brings some risks. Therefore, community-led recommendations and governance for tests, metrics and tools would aid trust and transparency in the process and of the assessment of fairness. And lastly, part of that trust is developing a catalogue of methods such that those methods can give insight into the underlying biases that we have with those tests and foster a sense of trust. The emphasis of this is to be an assistance rather than a simple end process. Finally, on this score, I'd also like to point out that we have a nice survey just out, I think now, but please, we'll be sending you a message probably again soon on discipline-specific metrics. We'd like to know a little bit more about what people are doing. Any questions now or any thoughts and comments?
Thanks, Mike. I'm opening the floor for discussion. Please raise your hand, or you can also add something to the chat. I see that Françoise. Yeah, Françoise, go ahead.
Yes, it's just to begin, but someone is beginning to speak. I added in the chat that I really appreciate the fact that you took care of citing biases of the tools, because I think it's critical. And I just suggest to add a mention of the biases to be included in the catalog. So it's written in the chat. And it's linked really to the sense of trust in the tools. If you know how they are biased, you are more trust. You are.
I totally agree that it is important to know those biases to be able to make those right decisions. So yes, in that catalogue, it should present all of the information about the tools, about the tests, importantly, so that we know whether they lead in a particular direction or not. That helps with assessing whether the tools themselves are also somewhat biased. And I've been looking at a number of the different tools at the moment, and the scores come all over the place because of those different emphasis, maybe more than biases, between the different tools or how they do things. So at a test level, it helps one understand. Maybe that information is too detailed for some people, but for those who want to evaluate tools for their wider community, then I think it is very important. So thanks for that comment.
Any other comments or suggestions? We have 1 minute left. See a comment in the chat from Barbara. Barbara, go ahead.
Yeah, I just saw one statement about the FIP on the slides, and it says that it is so dependent on the input of one person or so, but that's actually not planned to be done like that. Should be the output of a community or of the decisions that a community took. So yeah, and actually the better you know about these resources, the better the outcome is. Therefore it is a guided solution and not just a quick response to a questionnaire. It is not easy, it's a workflow, right? But should be possible to be answered when a group sits together and decides. I think this was not covered well in this summary.
It wasn't covered well in the discussion either. I think one of the issues at the moment is certainly from experiences that it is at the moment small pockets, perhaps, and often one or two in different places making the decisions for their repository rather than the whole community or a group of organizations making a decision for that community. This is yet to come into practice quite so much as far as we can see, but it should be at a much broader level so that a community makes the decisions of what are parts of that fair implementation profile, not just an individual. But at the moment, it can be and has been, and I've seen it being just one person making the FIP, and that's where it sits. Maybe that's an issue with the FIP wizard as well, as that seems to be a one way of doing it, maybe a little bit more difficult where you've just got one person playing with the tool.
Thanks,
yeah, so
Mike. Sorry,
I'm okay with that. I just want to say I'm okay with this then too.
Okay. I'm afraid we have to move on to our next session. So Maggie, I saw your hand raised. You can either keep it for at the end because we have time for a general discussion, or add your comment to the chat. But for now, we have to move on to the next session, which is the one on sustainability. And I'd like to give the floor to Maaike.
Yes.
if she's
thank
back.
you,
Yes.
Marisa. Yeah. Switched camera, so sorry for the jarring new angle for those of you who meet with me often online. Yeah, so this session on sustainability of project outputs was a new topical session that was added in this year's round of the Synchrinisation Force. It is a topic that is very relevant and current for at least a fair impact project, but we know that all projects have experiences with similar challenges and similar difficulties in designing their plan and making sure that the project outputs that they have worked so hard on are sustainable for the longer term. So we decided to add this topic for this year's round so that we can bring everyone together and talk about sharing insights and what are challenges and what are recommendations we can make for the future to make sure that sustainability is better handled and better covered. So if you move to the next slide, we didn't have any recommendations to start with, of course, so we moved right along to the highlights. We discussed and we came to a couple of shared understandings with regards to sustainability. One of them is that each project requires a unique and tailored sustainability plan. There is no one size fits all. Within each project, every output that is worth sustaining needs its own unique and tailored sustainability plan. So there is a lot of detail, there is a lot of differences between all the different choices that need to be considered and that need to be made. But some form of sustainability plan is needed in all cases. And with that in mind, planning towards sustainability should be something that starts early in a project's lifetime. It should involve all relevant partners, and it should also be something that is dynamic and that is flexible as the project advances. So from the personal view of fair impact, we started with our inventory of what we want to sustain almost as soon as we started the project. But of course, this has changed over time as those developments have gone through over the years, and as you see some things that you may not expect to be so impactful actually take priority, and some other shifts happening over time. So it's something you should consider yourself with for the entire duration of the project. Those two things were sort of, I think, generally agreed in our discussion during the session. Then we also spend a bit of time discussing some existing initiatives towards sustainability or topics that relate to sustainability. And those are also covered in the milestone report with some explanation of what we discussed about them and what kind of experiences were shared. So, for example, the macro roadmap, the sustainable exploitation planning tool, the Horizon Booster, and the EU Open Research Repository pilot. So there's differing levels of experience and feedback based on those initiatives. And they're all more or less still ongoing and taking shape of how they can be truly effective for the project. So they're quite new and still in pilot phases of development. So those were covered for a bit and discussed, but it also, the main point that came out of this session is that it's very tricky that EOSC remains such a moving target for projects. So it currently is not really available for the integration, endorsement, or uptake of any of our project solutions. And there have been shifts within the lifetime of our project. So things you planned for at the start of your project or in even the proposal phase of your project are not the same as they are currently, which makes it very challenging for projects to even respond to this moving landscape and quickly developing landscape in the plans that you make. So there are, of course, limits to what a project can do in their sustainability plans and what they can achieve. So it can be very challenging when things change, and especially when they change maybe with not the level of clarity and communication that we would desire. So there was a general need for more security and clarity for projects to really see where sustainability solutions can go. So these highlights led to our first set of recommendations on this topic, and we made 3 of them. So we're very curious to hear what your thoughts are based on your attendance of the session. First and foremost, the EOSC Association should consider incorporating and or referencing relevant outputs from different EOSC-related projects in the EOSC Federation Handbook or future versions of it. We are currently in the consultation phase of the Federation of the Handbook, so this is a very current topic and something that we see as a very, very useful point of reference for projects to use for their sustainability, at least for considering topics like endorsement or just pointing people to make sure that more people see certain outputs as a serious option for usage. Then it's very important that a dialogue is started or is continued. It depends a bit on how you look at it, between the EOSC Association and the EOSC-related projects to identify potential sustainability pathways for project outputs. So the feeling was a bit that projects were left to their own devices, and we would appreciate a bit more of a dialogue where the EOSC Association helps to identify those pathways and communicates and can present a bit more clarity for the future. So a possibility is during the upcoming winter school 2025, and I think there were already some mentions of this maybe being included in the agenda there. And then lastly, we also spoke about a sustainability handbook, and that could be created to capture the common challenges, experiences from projects that have considered sustainability so far, and then possible solutions or maybe more approaches to solutions from previous projects that can be very useful as a reference for new projects or projects not yet considering sustainability, as a point of reference for where to start, how to tackle it, and what kind of things you can consider. So these are the recommendations that we came up with, and I think we have a little bit of time now for some initial feedback or comments or any suggestions.
Thanks, Maaike. Any questions, comments, suggestions from the audience? Does everybody agree? Might be nice. Nobody. Françoise.
Yes, just to bother you for 1 minute. My question, I think it's very interesting to hear that because it comes from the crowd who is trying to do projects in the EOS context. Are you directly in touch with the association to push the conclusions towards them? Or do we have to help on that?
I'm personally not the best. No, I think PCO people would know a bit more about direct contact or SA. I know there's a couple of indirect ways in which communication happens, and sometimes all projects are called together for consultation.
Yeah, I know that that Ingrid is talking about, she's talking with the association, and I believe during the symposium a couple of weeks ago, she talked to other projects, and there is some work in the pipelines of having a discussion with multiple projects together with the association. So there is something in the pipeline, but nothing concrete yet, as far as I know.
I think if I can say one word again, I think it would be, when you have a report, it will be very useful that you encourage the participants to distribute it. Especially because of that point, which is more going upwards. It's a bit different from the other points, I guess.
Sorry, which report, Francis?
The report you will prepare.
This one?
This one, yes.
Yes, sure.
And, to have this reflected in the final report.
Yeah.
Thanks, Françoise. Okay, let's move on to our next topic, and I would like to give the floor to Josephine.
Thank you very much. So within our session on PIDs, we looked into a few bigger areas, such as sustainability of PIDs and related services. And we also discussed the overall identified need for increased collaboration among PID service providers. And then we drilled down into a few certain areas that these substantially covers, such as PID policies and exit strategies. Next slide, please. So we started with these principles that are that we derived from the multi-annual roadmap outlined for the years 2025 to 27. So we took the approach of looking slightly into the immediate future in our session to try and identify the key topics that still needs to be addressed. Next slide, please. So here are some of the highlights that we were able to derive from the discussion that we had. So we had a good lineup of participants, a nice discussion. And based on this discussion, we were able to draw the conclusion that we are indeed currently focusing on the right things. So that was reassuring. And for example, especially when it comes to advancing the policy and practice related development of PID implementation and usage. We also noticed that we need to be adaptable to change due to the EOSC being in flux currently. So there is also a call for being able to reassess the challenges involved and the related benefits as well. Overall, a conclusion was that there is a risk of fragmenting the landscape even more due to several different providers having slightly different approaches affiliated with different domains using different schemas. So even the current EOSC PID policy does not directly address these kinds of issues because the policy is written to be more technical and PID types neutral. But this is a reason why we clearly need an increased collaboration of sort among PID service providers. We have also in the Fair Impact project suggested a collaboration mechanism and how that would ideally look like. This was discussed a little bit as well. And an overall agreement may be that when engaging in these types of collaboration mechanisms, it should really be built on agreed responsibilities to cater for success. And lastly, adherence to and existence, the very existence of well-defined PID policies is crucial in ensuring a well-functioning PID infrastructure, as they set the very foundation to what is needed to cater for persistence, resolvability, and sustainability of PIDs. Next slide, please. So here are our recommendations. Firstly, building sustainability and collaboration structures around PID is a multi-layer issue, which requires the involvement of several key stakeholders. Collaboration between the PID service providers within the EOSC Federation and related nodes is a complex task where the PID services themselves need to be interoperable with some clearly defined responsibilities of service maintenance and provision. But we also need the collaboration with key players from outside of EOSC, such as the RDA, FDO Forum, and EPIC, which are doing a lot of good things as well around PIDs. So we should not focus only on what happens within EOSC. Another key summary is that there is a clear call for convergence among PID service providers, as I mentioned already in another context. As the current PID services are built on different technologies and related policies, they are coupled with contractual agreements that look a little bit different from each other, and this makes it quite hard to fully enable interoperable services. Another key finding was that the issues and the risks that need to be tackled are increasingly of a social nature rather than merely a technical one. meaning that it requires adaptability of the different PID types or PID services to cater for the different user needs that have, some of which have been identified, but not in this discussion so much, but outside and broadly. And lastly, the end users should increasingly be involved when advancing sustainability, persistence, and resolvability of PIDs. So we should not forget to include the end user perspective in many of the things that we do. And maybe an overall sort of comment is that it's reassuring that also the broader community sees the same sort of needs or things to be addressed as we do within the project. I think that these are maybe not very new realizations, but still good to have this reassurance that this is a broader issue that needs to be solved together. So that is all I had on this. Do we have any questions for what you just heard?
Thanks, Josephine. Maggie?
Yeah, thanks, Josephine, for a nice summary there. I would just add that one stakeholder category that we have maybe not touched upon so much, neither in this forum here or indeed in the USCP discussions, is publishers. Scientific publishers. They are increasingly getting involved in this dialogue around persistent identifiers, both for data and for other research artifacts. And sometimes it seems to me that I've been listening in a bit on some of that discussion going on, both in the RDA and in a more earth science related US context. And it seems to me that there are maybe some sort of unrealistic expectations from some publishers in terms of what researchers and repositories, etc., can and should be doing in terms of assigning PIDs to things. And then making them citable or referable in scientific literature. So I would just highlight that we also need to somehow engage in a dialogue with them before it becomes too late, as it were.
Yeah, thanks for that comment, Maggie. I fully agree that publishers have more or less been outside of our normal, the usual suspects that we engage with. So we haven't taken that viewpoint as much as we maybe should have. So that's a very good point.
Any other questions, comments, suggestions? Nope. If not, you can always add them to the chat or keep them in mind for the general discussion at the end, or add your comments to the draft report. But for now, then I suggest we move on to our next topical session. And I would like to give the floor to Anne-Sophie.
Yes, thank you. And hopefully you can all hear me. Let me just brief you, summarize what been done in the Synchrinisation Force workshop session on legal and organizational interoperability. And let's say that the focus was primarily on the legal side. We still need, bringing organizational interoperability a bit along. The questions this time we used in the surveys was these four, in actually to get from the sort of very sort of meta perspective on legal and organizational interoperability more into to practice. So how have you addressed legal interoperability in your project or initiative? And let me add that we had a panel of experts and indeed stakeholders in the field of interoperability to answer this question in the session. But this was the sort of the question you had in the survey and also for the session. And also again, getting into sort of practicalities, what standards do you know that will implement legal constraints from a technical point of view? And also, as some of you will be aware, we have produced this report on core metadata schemas for legal interoperability, and we were also asking in the surveys if you knew that this report, and of course our panelists knew the report at, and what additional support would help to overcome the challenges. So that was both for the survey and for the session with the experts and stakeholders and all the participants, very active participants, was the sort of the point of departure. And let me just add a little commercial break. Yeah, sorry, Marita. Just to that we had this. We still have this podcast, and we can add the link to this in the document. We started with recommendation from you can say from the first round, where we had the objectives here was to have a status and adoption of the legal and organizational recommendations. So sort of this very sort of meta approach. How are we doing for these sort of very high level recommendation in different scientific fields? So for this, as mentioned, our intention was to get feedback from concrete implementation of legal and organizational policy into actually you can say in data repositories and also in action, you can say. So getting from sort of the high level in the if lost interoperability framework to also using this suggestion by our report on core metadata schemas, so sort of to follow the arrow and getting into to practice. So yeah, that's it. And we had a nice engagement and a lot of people attended the session, so we were very happy for that. And taking out the highlights from a very sort of I think we had very good perspectives and from experts, really knowledgeable people, and also sort of participation, so both in chat and sort of spoken. Still lots and lots of challenges related to legal interoperability, as also mentioned in first round. We have only had 2 of these workshops, and indeed legal and organizational interoperability is maybe a bit put in the dark on behalf of semantic and technical interoperability, which is to some extent given sort of more visibility and more work. From the panel and also from all the participants, the standards that can support legal and organizational interoperability is acknowledged. I don't think from this session I will say how much used, but it's known that there are standards that can help the implementation interoperability in these 2 perspectives. And again, there different approaches is needed to overcome the challenges. That's very much the sort of the message we took from the session, and that is sort of in a spectrum, you can say, if that's the effect, really from really supplying training and train the trainers, education, all kinds of sort of knowledge sharing or knowledge build up in this field is important. To the other, you can say, end of the spectrum, just do something, take a use case, take sort of a focused approach, and actually implement legal interoperability. So that's sort of going from 2 ends of the spectrum. But the overall is indeed that more knowledge is needed. And I put in the middle is you know we need a help desk on legal and organizational interoperability. Who are the experts? Who can we call to get this solved? Because often you will not find this support in your own organization that will have this perspective, both from the scientific side and as well as the sort of, you can say, traditional legal and organizational side. So you need someone to call, let's say. Yeah, please change slide. Thank you. So the recommendation we draw out at the session this year, that it could be an idea to have a kind of a central hub to bring everyone to the same level of understanding, even if it's not very high, but still have sort of a common understanding that would be very, very valuable and helpful for moving forward. Also, it was discussed is to have this kind of contact point where we can actually ask questions and get answers on these matters, and it could be to have some basic guidelines. Then we should just to have continued collaboration on these matters for the future projects, like Fidelis, WorldCloud Plus, and Climate Adapt for years, as mentioned here, but could be others. And just a little add-on, maybe as the winter school could it be a theme for the winter school also to take in legal and organizational interoperability, as it's again maybe semantical and technical interoperability doesn't do it all. And indeed, need for capacity building for research infrastructures to get ahead. And here, this use case approach, so kind of more just do it kind of approach, will also sort of move things forward in order to not be to really get to get things moving, even though that we still need some basic level of understanding. Yes, I think that was it from the legal and organizational session.
Thanks, Anne-Sophie. Are there any questions, comments, suggestions? I saw discussion in the chat, but I think that was about the PIDs still. Maggie, anything you want to add?
Yeah, you might be right, Maggie. We're overloading the winter school, so let's go for summer. No, that's quite right. But indeed, we need something here too for the future projects, somewhat here too.
Any other comments? If not, we have gained another minute again, so that's nice. So let's move on to our next topical session, and I would like to give the floor to Joy.
Thanks, Marita. So I'm presenting the session. I actually wasn't at it this time, but I hope I can summarize the discussions that we had. So this session looked at the topic of trustworthy digital repositories, and this is a topic that has been explored in every of the Synchrinisation Force sessions to date. So it's clearly a very relevant topic for us, and the focus on these sessions has changed slightly over the last 3 years. I think the session that we had in 2023 really was focusing on the fact that we need to look at other ways to make trustworthiness clear about repositories. It can't just be certification, and to think about how transparency can support trustworthiness. This year, what we tried to do was to focus on how you can support people who work in repositories to be able to make those steps to improve transparency. The session tried to bring together both those who have provided support to people who work in repositories to become more trustworthy and transparent, but also we wanted to try and include a couple of recipients of support just to get a sense of what they felt worked and where there might still be some gaps. We ended up getting about 35 people in the room, and I think we have some people from that session in the room today. So if I get anything wrong, you can feel free to jump in and correct me. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So this is just a recap of the recommendations we started with from the 2022 Synchrinisation Force report. As noted, it was made very clear that trustworthiness is really something that people need to decide for themselves, and that we need to give them the tools to be able to make their own decisions. And the best way to do that is through transparency. So not just focusing on certification, but really trying to understand how we can provide the evidence to help people make their own decision about trustworthiness. We also focused in the session from last year on the need for support, that we see that we need both generic solutions around what is good practice in terms of both certification, but also trustworthiness more generally. But that, as we've heard from previous speakers, really can depend on your community. So there will be also a need for domain-specific and customized support. I think it was probably worth mentioning that we thought that there was support needed both at the domain level in some cases, but also at the local level, so either at a country or a region. The last recommendation we had was that there is a need for support networks. These can be thematic in nature, they can be national, they can be international, but there's a need for some sort of a support network to be there, and there should be some efforts to put these in place. So that's what we started with, and we can move on to the next slide, and I can just pick up on a couple of the highlights from the discussion. So the discussions really did emphasize this notion. I think the last recommendation around the needs for support networks and communities of practice really did come up strongly in this year's session. I think there was a recognition that we'll need maybe more than one community of practice, and they will have to be done at different levels. We know that there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution for this, but I think the key message that came through from the discussions was that having a communities of practice does require time and effort from people who are involved in them. So it's important to scope them well, to make sure that the realistic objectives are attached to them, but also that the people who take part are active in doing what is required. So it does have to be an active community of practice. I think the other thing that came through very strongly is that they have to be inclusive. There was this notion that we have to be clear about what's the gate for letting people into these communities of practice, but once you're in, you really do have to play your role. The other thing that came through from the discussions from those who were receiving the support was that definitely the time and effort needed to improve transparency and hopefully trustworthiness takes significant time and effort. But what we found is that, and this is something we've heard before, the effort that is put into this does lead to real life rewards and benefits. So we had people citing things like better organizational knowledge, understanding, the processes and procedures of their services, the roles and the responsibilities, but also that it forced them to talk to people both within their own organization and externally. So the benefits certainly seem to justify the effort and time put in. I think there was also a strong recommendation in the discussion that we have to celebrate incrementalism, as is put here. This is the notion that certification, or even just becoming more trustworthy, is not a flick of a switch. It takes a lot of time and effort, and it's worth celebrating even small steps that you can take towards improving these aspects of your repository service. So trying to provide that mechanism so that people can incrementally demonstrate improved transparency and trustworthiness, and how we can do that, I think, will be important going forward. And the last thing that we picked up on in this session was to hear a little bit from a couple of initiatives that have been providing the support. We heard from Kathleen Shearer at CORE about some global initiatives, and also we heard from a new European Commission-funded project called Fidelis. And both are working to support this notion of communities of practice and networks of trustworthy digital repositories. And I think, there was clear discussion about the fact that we need to have these talking to each other, and there needs to be some cooperation. So there was some optimism about how these sorts of initiatives might be able to support trustworthy networks going forward. So if we can go on to the last slide, please. The recommendations. I think one thing I will say here, and for those of you who have read the previous milestone reports for both the Synchrinisation Force sessions in 2022 and 2023, you'll notice that we're not seeing a huge differentiation between the recommendations. A lot of these have kind of been core themes that have come through in all three of the reports. And I think that probably just emphasizes that hopefully the right recommendations. What we have done this time is maybe just move a little bit more towards some specific recommendations rather than general ones. The first one is that we need to, as we noted in last year's session, to put more effort into building communities of practice and really kind of recognizing that these offer a valuable source of peer-to-peer support. So that certainly came through again this year. Again, we talked about this need for a mixed approach to delivering support, whether it's general and tailored. I think the difference that came through this year is that we had a strong recognition that we have to also recognize that financial support is needed. We can do as much as we want to train people, but we also have to make sure that the financial support is available. When we talk about trustworthiness schemes, there are lots of different ways, as we've heard previously, of measuring different aspects of fairness and service provision levels. So there's lots of different trustworthiness schemes, and there are pros and cons to the different approaches, whether there are some that are more generic, some that are more discipline specific. And I think Mike covered some of the pros and cons about these in his talk about the metrics. What we felt was that, be different where it makes sense to be different, but wherever possible, try to harmonize these schemes, because it just makes it easier for the repositories to hopefully have a more level understanding of what's needed, and also to be able to provide some support. So harmonization of these is desirable where we can do it. And the last one here is really, again, that we do want to move towards this development of a European network of trustworthy repositories. But the key thing we have to make sure is that this is an inclusive approach, and that there is strong collaboration, not just with the stakeholders at the European level, but also on the global level. So I think that's it for the TDR session. But as I say, if anybody was in the session and thinks I've misinterpreted something, please let me know.
Thanks, Joy. Any questions or comments? Nobody. Okay, well, you're still keeping in mind, you might think of something for the general discussion at the end, or add it to the report. So then, thanks, Joy. Move on to the final session, and I would like to give the floor to Esteban.
Thank you, Marita, and hi, everyone. So in previous editions of these workshops, we will focus on different interoperability platforms, like the platform of Elixir, and also in other frameworks like the cross-domain interoperability framework. So in this edition, we decide to focus on more in the EOS interoperability framework and the different components and the role that these components has in this EOS interoperability framework. So we address different questions that we will share with you in the survey. So thank you for all your responses. And these questions are very related about what is the role of the EOS component. For example, how may the adoption of the EOS interoperability framework be made measurable? Because we believe this is one of the things that we discussed in this workshop was to how to measure the level of implementation of the EOS interoperability framework. So next slide, please. So our starting point was 3 recommendations from the previous edition of this workshop. The first one is the need for a common understanding of semantic artifact definitions, okay? Basically with the objective to reduce the ambiguity. The second recommendation was related with the need to align cross-disciplinary semantic artifact. Okay, and the third one was the need for more services supporting the adoption and implementation of these semantic artifacts. Okay, during the workshop, we present 2 tools that they are being developing right now by Fair Impact and also for FairCore for EOS. The first one is the semantic artifact catalog. Okay, we see all the aspects of this component, and another component was the MSCR, to create these mappings and to allow the cross-domain work. So next slide, please. So these highlights was extracted based on the discussion during the workshop, the discussion we was raised in the chat, and also with the responses of the survey. Okay, the first highlight is the importance to have a impactful solution. Basically, is some components, something tangible that we can use and refine. And also practical guidelines, okay? The practical guidelines are very, very, very relevant. For example, in the context of the EOS interoperability framework, this is important that we have guidelines to, if you are developing a component, how can you integrate this component, for example, in the EOS interoperability framework? And also, if you have another components or a data services, etc., how can you integrate these components in the future architecture of the EOS? Another highlight is the semantic web object should be queryable across multiple catalogs. So the idea is to use a non-centralized approach to connect these different semantic artifact catalogs. Another highlight is the use of a repository of control vocabularies for consistent cross-domain use. Another highlight is foster institutional and governance support for interoperability. Okay, I think this is a recurrent highlight and recommendations that we always give to EOS in this case. And finally, another highlight is to emphasize the importance of monitoring and support the interoperability. So next slide, Marino. And just to finalize, we have 2 recommendations, but we consider to include more recommendations. So we appreciate all the feedback that you can give us in the report. So the first recommendation was related with the work that the EOS interoperability framework did, and also all the material that is produced in the different EOS task force, including the interoperability task force, and also in the different projects, no? Because we are producing all the project, task force, etc. We are producing a set of recommendations that need to be implemented. Okay? Some of these recommendations are very difficult to try to interpret, no? Because well, there's some ambiguous or needs to be. We need to try to build these. We can see these recommendations are more understandable, I think, for the people who implement. So for this reason, one of our recommendation is to use indicators or metrics that can assess the framework's implementation. Okay? In this case, the interoperability framework recommendations. One of the suggestions is, why don't you use tools that they are using that they are using for interoperability aspect, like CAT, Fuji, or the semantic interoperability profiles, no? Because we think that can facilitate this work to assess the level of implementation of the EOS interoperability framework, and also to assess the compliance with some interoperability policy. A final recommendation is recognize the semantic artifact catalog as a critical part of the long-term viability of any research data infrastructure. Okay? One of the recommendations that we are consider also is to the mappings. No? So in the case of the mappings, I think that we need to start promoting the tools that they are existing right now, beta or alpha release, to allow users to make these mappings. Okay, and I think this is important because it will help us to, in the future, to improve the recommendations of the EOS interoperability framework. So that's everything I want to comment. So if you have any thought or comment or suggestion, just please use the chat, or you can directly edit in the report as Marita comment. One last thing I have to mention that regarding the first recommendation, this interoperability policy, indicators, and metrics, we have an open call in Fair Impact. So if you are interested, we can share the link with you in case you want to participate.
Thanks, Esteban. Any questions, comments? See a comment from Françoise. Yeah, Françoise, go
Yeah.
ahead.
It's just to insist on something I already said several times before. We have to be very careful with assessment tools, metrics, and so on. And I think I understand the statement here, but I think it's good to say that assessment is a help and to put a safeguard about the risk of a selection process based on imperfect tools, which will probably never be perfect, especially if you say that it's difficult to interpret what is required in the IF. This means the assessment can be a bit fuzzy if the interpretation is not clear. So I suggest that this is discussed somewhere, or at least cited as an issue.
Yeah, I agree. I think the importance is not we can say that the score that you have, it is something, or this tool can help you, to improve the interoperability of your component respect the other components. Okay.
Simon.
Yeah, a similar comment to that of Françoise, and it relates to the earlier discussions about assessment as well. And I put some comments in the shared documents on this point. Obviously, assessment is very useful. Understanding is a maturity are very useful, but our current knowledge of what is good for a particular discipline is not sufficiently mature for us to develop really reliable assessment systems. Similarly, in the context of this group, the interoperability framework is just not sufficiently precise at this stage for us to have an assessment framework. Now, I'm not dissing the idea of this work. It's important. It has to go on, but we need to be a little bit humble about just where we are in the level of maturity. That said, where we have more specific metadata recommendations and specific semantic recommendations, then we can start using SHEX and shackle, the shapes-based technologies, W3 standards for accessible for validity of the metadata and the semantics, and we can move straight to that stage. So the discovery recommendations, the terminology recommendations, the access recommendations, and the integration recommendations in CDIF are at a sufficient level of specificity. So if someone wants to implement that, then shapes and SHEX, so shackle and SHEX could be used. We don't yet have those profiles developed for those technologies, but that is on the work program for the next stage of CDIF.
Okay, when I mean this compliant with the US Interoperability Framework, I don't say that we have everything clear. I want to say that, well, if we have an interoperability policy that maybe is not perfect, we can try to assess the compliance of our components with this interoperability policy. Okay? That was my statement. Okay, but I agree with you, Simon.
Thanks, everyone. I am going to stop sharing the slides now because now we are moving into the general discussion. So we have so we can actually see each other. So if anybody has any other comments or suggestions to anything that has been mentioned today, please go ahead. The floor is open. And if not, we might finish a little early today, which is never a bad thing. Any final questions, thoughts, suggestions? Maggie.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm really happy about this whole exercise, and I think especially the discussions we've been having in all of these sessions has been extremely valuable, because I think we need many more of these points where we can come together and talk about these types of topics in a quasi-organized fashion. So I mean, not just one meeting discussing everything, but where we can dive into specific topics. And summer schools and winter schools, etc., that's all fine, but not everyone can attend those, neither in person nor remotely. So there need to be many more forums where we can meet, and hopefully there will be some kind of initiative where we can continue with this also beyond the Fair Impact Project and similar. So I hope we can do that. Just one final comment. I think it's very important to try to manage expectations of what it is that we can achieve and who it is that is going to achieve different things, because we can only have uptake of the use of tools or processes, etc., if those are in place already. So that's one thing. And the other thing is making it possible to have a good dialogue between end users of tools and those people who have set them up, because too often tools are created in the framework of a project, and then that project ends and no one is really able or willing to further develop them or even correct bugs that have been found. So that is a huge issue as I see it, and also what has been the downfall of many of these fairness assessment tools, for instance, over the past couple of years. So you have a link, then you visit it, that you used, you visit it again, and then it's just not found or it's not working. So people get upset, pissed off, and angry and frustrated, and we do not want people to be frustrated with learning and applying best practices for fairness.
Yeah, thanks, Maggie. Excellent points. I totally agree. And that is also one of the reasons why we added a sustainability topic this year, right? To tackle these things. Before we leave, yeah, Sarah's already taken over the slide, which is great, because the first point that you mentioned, Maggie, about sustaining this framework, this mechanism of the synchronization force beyond the project, we actually have a short Mentimeter for a couple of questions just to get your input about the synchronization force as a mechanism. So I would like to invite you all to please take out your phones, scan the QR code, or just go to Menti and use the code to enter the Menti. And Sarah, I think I will hand over to you to run us through it.
Thanks. I'm just waiting a couple of minutes for people to join. This is just two questions that falls under the comment that Maggie just said on what's the future. You know that all this series was framed under the Fair Impact Project, and it has no house actually from now on. So of course we would like to find a house for the synchronization force. So if you can just confirm maybe that you can join the Menti and you can access the survey. So yes, okay, you can. So first question is very, very simple, just yes or no, or I don't know if you would like this to be continued afterwards. There is a no, and I'd like to ask maybe if anybody wants to open a microphone or say something. Of course, we are here to listen to comments. Let's wait 1 minute more and then we'll move to the other question that can help us a little bit more. Does anybody want to say to comment on the no? It would be useful for us, maybe because you think there are other places where to do so, or okay, you're shy, maybe. Then I'll move on to the other one. We have a question about what do you consider the main value? In fact, thanks to Simon, I noted down your comment on the chat. We have a third question convened under the OSCE Association. Yes, we have a third question about later about where and who could possibly pick this up. Okay, I see Armin. It would need to be very different outside the fair impact umbrella. Synchronizing what and whom exactly? So are you thinking more on I don't know, a technical context or a domain context?
I would say the idea of the synchronization force is a very good one. And it works well within the Fair Impact project and the different work packages and so on. So for it to work equally well beyond the Fair Impact project, it would need to be set up in the same fashion. So is that synchronization between existing projects, between so there would need to be a lot of thinking first before you can set up and make something work equally well like it has worked inside the project.
Thanks. Understood. Yeah. Okay, sorry, let me close some of the windows or I don't see the screen. So okay, so a lot of good points. Share information, allowing convergence. Can we include more end users? Yeah, that's a point. So we'll one thing we should consider is this has been on an invitation format with projects. Yeah, this might possibly change. An open space for discussion, input for projects. Okay. And so the last question we have, and this is where probably Simon, you can type your message before, which initiative should ideally adopt such an instrument? Francois, yes, it began on the first fair, which was indeed another project. So that's true that we started before, but by a similar driver.
You know, it was not organized with the work packages. It's an answer to the point about we have the work packages of Fair Impact. But in the previous incarnation, I think it was just to put the projects together.
That's always been, yes. This has always been.
It does not mean you need to have a project which is overarching, which is organizing it, which has work packages to define the way it is organized. You can do it without having the work packages. It's just a comment on the remark which was done previously.
That's also true. As soon as driving themes are identified. Yeah. Okay. Yes, task forces are working in parallel, but not all fully open. The opportunity areas, possibly. The obvious one would be the OSCE Association. There needs to be some mechanism for programmatic alignment and synchronization between those projects. The difference between as it is now is that we we only, let's say, focus on fair related aspects, while at the association or task forces level, okay, fair is a huge part of the discussion, but probably they go even beyond. But yeah, of course, this is one of the entities we are looking at. The NRDA has been mentioned as well.
So if I can just make a brief comment, maybe we should separate the synchronization as such from the setting up a discussion point or a meeting point or whatever, because I think when it comes to actual synchronization and things, then EOSC and similar types of actors, if we look also in a, not just in a European, but a global context, I mean, then that is more obvious that would work better, but I would not like to see the association, which is very bureaucratic in some sense and also very eager to mini control things, to be hosting discussion points or places where one can exchange experiences, etc. I think that would be stifling participation, especially because they are often wanting to control exactly who is invited to do what, which is good in certain places, but not for everything. So it's a bit, I can understand Armin's point very well there, that there are certainly differences between organizing it in an EOSC related fashion, targeting really technical and or conceptual alignment and synchronization, and then what I was talking about before, which is this more open discussion, open talk.
Thanks. There is a comment about the Oscars project. While they're only, I mean, the gathering of the clusters, so the community is there. Probably the format of the project is not exactly tied up to these efforts, but I understand probably the reason why this comment is it relates to the community that they mobilize. And okay. And with that, maybe, Marita, if you agree, I can just point to, since you're still there, the 3 important upcoming events that will take place and that you might be interested in. One is a webinar next week about the last open call that will close in December. So you're all invited to join online. Then we're continuing the series of national roadshows, and the next one is taking place virtually in Greece on the 18th of November. So I see there are some Greek people. There were some Greek people at least in the room. So maybe share the comment. Barbara, I saw your hands raised.
Yeah, it is related to the point that you raised before, the open call for financial support for the last call. I have already participated in one last year. So I wonder if it is possible to do it once again, try to apply again, or is it just for new people? Because it's another topic, but I'm interested in one of these.
Joy, I don't know if you can answer if you're still online. I don't want to say something wrong, honestly. I think so, but I prefer maybe to write you back. Okay, I think
because
each call is individually.
It's so effort to apply. I'm happy to do this effort, but actually there's one topic. It's absolutely related to what I do, and I want to learn more. And
I can answer very quickly. And we have a 10,000 euro limit on any single applicant. So as long as you haven't reached that limit, you're eligible to apply. Once you reach that limit, you can still apply, but you only get, whatever is left between what you've had already and the 10,000.
I was in one with 2,500, so I can.
Yeah, absolutely fine then. Yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you. I'm glad to hear you're going to apply. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And before we close, you're all invited to join us for the Fair Impact and Fair Corporate final event which we are organizing in February as a physical event in The Hague. So we are shaping up the agenda, and we are, I mean, the US members of the Synchrinisation Force are part, of course, of the invited people, and you'll get more information over the next days. But if you can travel, please save the date and consider joining us physically in the Netherlands. It will be in The Hague.
Thanks, Sarah. That was your last promotion, right?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Then I'll quickly share my screen again for some concluding remarks, just to wrap up this meeting today. So the next steps, it's been mentioned a couple of times already. So we have the milestone report. We have a draft version ready right now, and we would like to have your feedback. Please provide your feedback by the 22nd of November. So that's in 2 weeks' time. It is a Google Doc. Please use suggestion mode so that we can keep track of what changes have been added, what comments have been added. And the link will also be shared with you after the session today. I believe Sarah will send an email to everyone. Then once we have all those comments, we will go through the comments from that you have provided in the report, but also what has been given today during the discussion, and we will update the report and eventually finalize the report, which will become available through our website and on Zenodo. So that is at the end of December this year. And then, as I also mentioned at the start, this is the third and final Synchrinisation Force series. So we will combine everything that we have gathered throughout these past 3 years, and we will write up a white paper, which is due March 2025. So please keep an eye out for that one as well. Then I also had a slide on the open call, but Sarah already mentioned it, so I can skip that. And with that, I would like to thank you all for joining us today, for joining in the discussion, for all your contributions throughout the weeks. And I look forward to seeing you in other sessions in the future. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
A lot.
Thank you.